Greetings, Hermes Press fans. Dan Herman, publisher of Hermes Press, to show you a very important new history about one of the greatest creators of the Silver Age, Steve Ditko. Originally, when I was approached to do this book by David Currie, who wrote the book and who spent almost a decade corresponding with Steve Ditko, I was in a state of shock. This is a book that I have felt was necessary for years. There have been books written about Steve Ditko, but not with the help and assistance of Steve Ditko. And Steve Ditko is a legend, one of the few legitimate legends in the comic book. Everybody's a legend in the comic book world. Steve Ditko genuinely is a legendary character because he created one of the more important characters in the Marvel Universe. I've always maintained that the Fantastic Four is the heart and soul of the Marvel Universe. Other people feel it's the Amazing Spider-Man, and that's a question that can be argued over. But irrespective of that, two of the greatest characters created for the Marvel Universe, which have had incredible longevity and which personify the mythos of the Silver Age Marvel characters, would be Peter Parker, the Amazing Spider-Man, and Stephen Strange, Doctor Strange. Now here's the cover of the book, which was taken from original art, which was created by Steve Ditko for Charlton Comics. And the cover initially was, the original art was selected by our managing editor, Sabrina Herman. And when I saw it, I thought, this is a fantastic metaphor for Steve Ditko. Steve Ditko, of course, lived in the universe and the world that you and I supposedly live in. And yet, he had a philosophy based on Ayn Rand's books. Ditko loved Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, which is why the book is called Ditko Shrugged. Now, as you can see, you have a person in the real three-dimensional color world who's being pulled off into a universe that's black and white. And Mr. A, who is one of Ditko's characters, lives in a world of right and wrong, black and white. There is no gray. So the metaphor here is that the character being pulled from the color world is, in many respects, Ditko. He's being pulled by forces, in this case the writings of Ayn Rand, out of the world that everyone lives in into a different world where principle governs as opposed to expediency. And one of the things that really impressed me about David Currie's text, was that he paints a picture of Ditko where you will get to know Steve Ditko by the end of having read this book. Now, because this book is a book, we have elected, when David and I were discussing the design of this book, we elected to make it a book rather than have a lot of art in it, although there's a lot of art which is representative of what Steve Ditko was doing during the periods that are discussed here. There's also illustrations and photographs which we got from the Ditko family. Here's Ditko's door in his studio toward the end of his life, where it says S. Ditko on the door. And we have artwork from the various periods of his life. Here's a picture of him in the army, which we got from the Ditko family. And there is art which accompanies the third chapter of this book, which deals with the creation of the Amazing Spider-Man. And I'm not going to give away what's been written in this book. What I am going to tell you is that what has been written about the conceptualization, who did what and when, and why Amazing Fantasy 15 came out as it did, and why the story is the way it is, are not entirely accurate. This book will set the record straight based on what Steve Ditko told David Currie when he wrote to him. And we have not only some original artwork from Amazing Fantasy 15, here's the first page, the splash page for the first page of the story. We also have some of the correspondence that was exchanged between Steve and David Currie. Here's a picture of some of the correspondence, which echoes what's in the text of the book. So there's a lot in this book, and there's a lot of text. So unfortunately, Ditko fans, you're going to have to read this book in order to completely understand what David Currie and Steve Ditko are telling you. When this book was done, we were working on putting it together, and I designed this book, so if you don't like it, you blame me. But when we were in production on this book, Mark S. Ditko asked to see the manuscript, and David sent it to him. And the family got involved in this book, and from what I understand, were very happy with it because they felt that it was representative of Steve, of his uncle Steve. They didn't get involved in issues of comics history. They wanted to focus their efforts on making sure that the portrait of Steve Ditko as a person and Steve Ditko's philosophy and the way he looked at things was properly represented in here, which of course also relates to his work in comics. So the family has vetted this book, and let me just say that they didn't censor any part of this book because that would be inconsistent with Steve Ditko's philosophy. What they did was they augmented the text with more information, which made it more accurate and more descriptive. And the introduction to this book, because you know I put my reading glasses on when I'm going to read something. The introduction to this book was actually written by Mark S. Ditko, Steve Ditko's nephew. I'm going to read you the foreword, because it's the foreword, not the introduction. The foreword, because I think it sets the tone for this book. Steve Ditko was my uncle, my dad's older brother, so I've known him my entire life. It seemed like he was always around at family get-togethers and holidays and was just another fun family member to me and my siblings. You have to understand that in small-town Johnstown, especially in the 1960s, family was pretty important and central to our activities. And he goes on to describe how he grew up with his uncle and what his relationship with his uncle was and how he understood his uncle's point of view. I'll then pick up. Fast forward to early 2019 when I first saw the notice for this upcoming book and thought to myself, quote, Ditko Shrugged, great title. I wonder how the actual book will be. At the same time, I wondered who David Currie was and then left it at that. Then in mid-June, I got a message from David about his book on my uncle. Skipping over the fine details that occurred over the next month, I'll say this. Through our correspondence, I've grown to see that not only is David qualified to write what he wrote, but more importantly, his heart is in the right place. When it comes to people discussing my uncle Steve, it's difficult for me to hear the incorrect and embellished stories being told about his earlier years and the persistent and continued speculation and innuendos about his life. Thankfully, David allowed me to read his book and welcomed my seemingly endless pages of commentary with open arms. So now you can see why this is an important book. It's not an authorized biography, and it's not something that has been edited and sterilized and neutralized and made into something that is more public relations. It's an accurate history of Steve Ditko and his involvement with the Marvel Universe and later. And that's something I really wanted to publish. There have been other books about Steve Ditko, and they rely on things that have been whispered. They rely upon inaccurate information. They rely upon speculation and innuendo, just as Mark Ditko points out. And they're written by people that didn't really know Steve Ditko. And while it's pretty clear that David never actually physically sat down with him, the amount of correspondence that went on was adequate so that they got to know each other. And you'll see that by reading this book. The back cover has some art on it and some quotes from various people. This book has been very well sourced by David Currie, who talked to a number of people involved with Steve Ditko and involved with Marvel. And this book deals not only with Steve Ditko, but with Marvel and how it started out. You know, of course, it started out differently. Originally, it was Timely, and then it became Atlas, and then it became Marvel. And it became a phenomenon when it became Marvel and the creation of the Marvel Universe with Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, and Don Heck and John Buscema and Gil Kane and Roy Thomas and John Severin and Marie Severin, and I'm going to miss somebody. I'm just going from memory here. People are going to start screaming, "Yeah, you missed somebody." But there are a lot of Gene Colan, people that made a significant contribution to the initial creation of the Marvel Universe. And Jack Kirby, I already mentioned Jack, and Wally Wood. But Steve Ditko stands in a very important position in the Marvel Universe. And this book chronicles that and goes further and discusses what was happening in the 70s and the 80s. It discusses various aspects of the development of Marvel in the context of Steve Ditko, and continues to discuss Steve Ditko throughout his career until he passed away. So I'm familiar with the other books on Ditko, and I believe this is the definitive biography / art book / monograph on Steve Ditko. And I hope you agree. So this book is in the United States now. This is Friday, the 16th of October. These are the advances. They're in transit from China, where this book was printed by our very fine printer. And I expect that we'll have the book here in 3.5 weeks, which means that you'll be able to buy it on our website in about 3.5 weeks, and it'll be available commercially for Christmas through comic book stores, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, any place on the internet. But it's going to be available here on Hermes Press's website first. You'll be able to get immediate delivery on it from Hermes Press, and we'll, of course, be discounting it. And we have various sales like everybody else does, so you might be able to pick up a pretty good deal on this book. And I would suggest buying more than one. Buy one to read and put one to put in your collection, and buy it as a Christmas gift. But I believe that Steve Ditko now has a book that properly represents who he was and what he did. So, any questions? You know where you can get a hold of us. That's all for now. Bye-bye.